Welcome to Sharkie's Gaming Controllers. I'm Sharkie, and in today's video I'll be taking a look at the Konig Game Controller for PlayStation 3. Now this is a standard gamepad controller, but what makes it interesting is that this is a boomerang style controller, very similar to the original PlayStation 3 prototype. It looks incredibly similar. It's one of the closest ones I've found that looks like that original prototype. Before we go more into the shape and its features, let's have a look at this packaging. So it comes in this blister style box here. Up the top here is the brand, and I believe you pronounce that Konig Electronic. I think that's at least how you pronounce it. It's a brand from Holland. And down the bottom here it says a game controller suitable for PlayStation 3. And of course in the display window there you can see the boomerang style gamepad itself, looking very cool and unique. On the back here there is a bit of a description, and it just says this wired controller for PS3 is equipped with 4 indication LEDs and all basic functions for optimal virtual battle. Of course it is also used for use with PlayStation 2 and PlayStation games. And of course everything else here is different languages. And down the bottom here it just says specifications, dual analog control sticks, 5 analog action buttons, 8-way analog D-pad, 4 analog shoulder triggers. And down here, of course, is its brand, Konig of Holland. Now, once you pulled out everything from the box, this is what you get. You, of course, get the boomerang style controller itself, looking very unique with that boomerang shape. And you also get this very simple instruction manual. So it's just a single page, and it just goes through your very basic instructions of sort of connecting it to your system, its features, and of course safety and maintenance, as well as some warranty information. So it's a very basic instruction. So now let's look at the Konig gamepad itself. So straight away you can see the boomerang shape of this controller. It looks really unusual, but it looks so similar to the original PlayStation 3 prototype. In fact, I'll put an image up here so you can look at them side by side and see just how close Konig got to the original PS3 prototype. They look incredibly similar. They've both got that kind of a boomerang shape. Now, taking an overview of the controller, that's the front there, and you can see these long, thin handles down here. The bottom there, and the sides, the back, the other side, and the bottom. Now this is a wired controller. It connects to your PS3 via USB here. So you just plug that into your console. Now like I mentioned, these have long, thin handles, which actually surprisingly fit quite well in your hands and is actually quite comfortable. You've got 2 analog sticks here. These also click down. Now the analog sticks are a bit smaller than the official DualShock 3, and they don't move as smooth. They just don't feel as nice. And the rubber on top here is also a much cheaper quality. It does feel like it almost gets a little bit sticky sometimes. So it's definitely a much cheaper feel analog sticks. You've got the D-pad here. And this looks very similar to the official controller. But it is way more cheaper. It's soft to the touch and is not as responsive. At the top here, you've got the Konig logo, which acts as the PS button. And then down here, you've got 4 rubberized buttons, which is select, start, turbo, and clear. Because this controller has turbo functionality, so if you want a button to be continuously pressed, you would press turbo and press the button you want, and that'll then continuously press the button for you. You can use this on the face buttons, the bumpers, triggers, and also clicking down on the stick. So you can use it for any one of those functionals. If you want to clear it, you just hold down the button and press clear, and it'll clear turbo from that button. So it's a very handy feature if you like to use turbo. Now on the side, you've got the face buttons here. So you've got square, X, circle, and triangle. These are slightly a bit smaller than the official controller, but they still work quite well, quite easy to press, and they feel quite responsive. Turning this over, on the back here you've got the bumpers and triggers, and of course these will act as L1, R1, L2 and R2. Now the bumpers feel alright to press, they seem to work okay. The triggers however don't feel nearly as good as the official PS3 controller. They are very soft, they don't have much travel to them either, and they do have sometimes the tendency to get stuck. So again, it just makes it feeling very cheap, and they feel more like buttons than actual triggers. On the back here, there's also the 4 LED indicator lights, just like the official controller. So it does have all the functionality of the official controller, but it is a much cheaper controller, being a third party. You definitely feel it when you start using all the different functions. It definitely does not feel as a high quality as you would get if you were to buy a DualShock 3. So how does this Konig Gamepad compare to the official DualShock 3, and is this gamepad comfortable? Well, first, let's compare it to the DualShock 3. So here's a DualShock 3. So if you put these controllers side by side, you can immediately see the difference. Got a completely different shape to them. And the gamepads here handles are much longer than the DualShock 3 controller there. And there's your side view, which also shows the length there of the handles. And the back. So you can see there's quite a bit difference between them. Comfort-wise, when you're holding the Konig gamepad, these long kind of thin handles spread across your hand a little bit more and give you a much thinner grip, but a much easier grip to hold onto. So it just gives you a bit more grip. And of course, it's very easy to reach the back here and the buttons and reach everything else. Where on the official controller, these much shorter handles, they go only to really your center of your palm, and they give you a much shorter grip length. So in terms of grip, this gamepad is actually more comfortable. The thing that this gamepad is missing, which of course the DualShock 3 has, is a bit of weight and also much higher quality functionality. So this controller is very light. It feels incredibly light to use and to hold like this, where this one has quite a nice weight to it. Now, part of that of course is the battery, but just in general it's probably just a higher quality controller. But this could have used a bit more weight. I think a bit more weight would have made it a little bit more heftier and made it a much more quality feeling controller. And of course, functionality. The Sony controller is a much higher quality controller, and all the functions work better, especially the triggers. So if you look at the official controller here, you can see the proper triggers like that. They look like triggers, they feel like triggers. When you look at the Konig gamepad and you press these triggers, they just look like buttons. They're very uninteresting, feel very cheap, and are not very responsive. You could easily use them though. They're not terrible, but they definitely are not like the official triggers. But it does make me think, because these controllers basically, this is the most closest one I've found to the official PlayStation 3 controller, the prototype that we might have gotten had Sony decided to go with it. So would it have been comfortable? I think it would have been. If you had taken high quality parts from this controller and you put them in something like this, the actual shape of it would have been quite comfortable. It is a very nice shape. The thing that would have had to change though is the back here, because the way they've installed these kind of triggers in here, there's not enough room. So they almost had to make like a hollow here on either side, so the triggers are a bit more depressed, so that you could have triggers like the official controller. I think if they had done that, it would have been very cool. So, I mean, quality-wise, using these two controllers, yes, this is more comfortable to hold in general, but you just can't beat the functionality of the DualShock 3. I mean, this controller does not even come close to comparing to actually using it. So, you know, while this is a little bit more comfortable to hold, like if you had a choice between these two, of course, the DualShock 3 is the way to go every single time. Even though this is slightly more comfortable, it's still a third-party cheap controller, basically a knockoff. So it's not anything to rave about. The only unique thing it has is the fact that it's got a boomerang shape, and I have to admit that shape is actually quite comfortable. So it really makes you think, like, had Sony gone ahead with the PS3 prototype controller, I think it might have been quite comfortable to use. So now let's compare the Konig gamepad with the PlayStation 3 prototype controller. And as you can see from this image, how close these two controllers actually look. They look incredibly close to each other. So you've got the same sort of long, thin handles, although the prototype here looks a lot longer. Same sort of shape, although again the prototype is a little bit more curved. So instead of having a much flatter face here, it's more curved and a bit more thinner on the top here. It's also got a much bigger hollow down the center here, as you can see. It does look like it has the official PS3 sticks though. The sticks themselves look very close to a DualShock 3. And of course the buttons also will probably be very close, I would say, but they look semi-transparent in this photo. But the shape itself is very close. The one different thing is these triggers. Like if I just change the photo here, you can see here on the back of this prototype, it's actually got a much bigger trigger. They're much thicker instead of being flat like this one. And it's almost like it's got that little hollow and a bit curved. So it looks like this trigger would travel quite a bit and probably feel much closer to a DualShock 3 trigger. You can also see it on here as well, how raised those triggers are. They look much more raised than these ones. So it definitely does look very similar to it. And also when I go back to this one, you can see how much curved it is here in the back, where this doesn't curve as much. It's basically just got one kind of flat face going on the back there. So it does have some slight differences, but when you compare it head on like that, this is probably the closest controller that looks like the original Boomerang controller that I've found. It looks incredibly close. And like I mentioned before, this controller is actually comfortable. It is actually quite nice to hold and feels quite ergonomic. So it really does make you wonder, like, had Sony gone with this with their PS3 console and this had been the official controller, I think it would have been quite comfortable. Obviously, it would have been different to get used to from the original design, because, I mean, face it, the Sony controller is quite a classic design from PS1, PS2, and PS3. They didn't change a huge much about the actual form factor. So when this came out, it was incredibly different. But, you know, I think it actually would have been quite comfortable. It would have certainly been a bit more unique. But yeah, I would say the Konig is probably the closest controller that you can get to the official prototype. So if you're a collector and you're looking at getting something close, then this is definitely a controller to look out for. Overall, this is not a great gamepad, but you kind of expect that, being a cheap third-party knockoff. I will say though that this controller is definitely the closest knockoff I have seen that resembles the famous Boomerang PS3 prototype controller. At the end of the day, I wouldn't say go buy one of these and use it as your everyday PS3 controller. It's not that great, but it's not really terrible. It's a perfectly usable controller, but the DualShock 3 is still better in every way. I mean, yes, this controller is comfortable. It's got a really unique shape, and that shape is very ergonomic. But the fact that all the functions kind of let it down and kind of feel a bit cheap, you know, just use the DualShock 3. At the end of the day, playing PS3 games will be a much more enjoyable experience using the official controller. But it definitely does give you thought, especially after kind of feeling what the Boomerang shape feels like. Like, if Sony had have released that Boomerang style PS3 controller as their official controller, would it have been comfortable? And you know, I think it might have been, because this kind of controller here, it feels quite comfortable to hold and it feels quite ergonomic. So had Sony released that prototype PS3 controller, I think it actually would have been quite usable. It probably would have been very comfortable to hold, and if people got used to it, then I would say that controllers today might look a little different. So it's one of those things that I think back when Sony kind of showed that prototype image, everyone kind of got worried because they were so used to the PS1 and PS2 gamepad, that kind of iconic Sony shape. But it does give you pause and make you wonder, like, how different things would have been now had Sony gone with that kind of unique Boomerang style controller. Feel free to leave a comment, guys, and let me know what you think. Do you think the Boomerang controller would have been comfortable? So anyway, guys, this controller is still a very unique thing. The Boomerang shape just makes it really unique. And I'll say if you're a collector or just someone that's curious, that wants to kind of feel what a Boomerang controller feels like, then this is probably a controller to look out for. But other than that, there's no really other reason to really get this thing. At the end of the day, it's a cheap third-party knockoff, but at least they did something different, which I like. Anyway, guys, that was the Konig Boomerang style gamepad controller for PlayStation 3. If you liked this video, then go ahead and hit that like button, as it really helps out a lot. Please subscribe and hit that notification button so you don't miss any of my new videos, as I'll have heaps more gaming controls and accessories up very shortly. If you would like to support my channel, then click the join button and become a channel member. You'll get monthly perks, and the extra support really helps me out a lot. Thanks again for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next one.